This is the most important interview I have ever done. The most important, by far, that I've ever done in, I guess, being a truth warrior and member of the Conspiratorium Clerisy. Dane Wigington is my hero, and I want to thank you for all the work you've done. Your site, geoengineeringwatch.org. It's about chemtrails, which we will not call chemtrails, but Dane, did you know sometimes you got to use code words and shortcuts so people will know what we're talking about? First, welcome and thank you.
The honor's mine, Lionel. Thank you for all the work you've done for the greater good.
Now, we're going to, I don't want to reiterate from the beginning, but I'm going to get down to brass tacks, and we're going to have all the links where people can go and learn more of this. But I have been through the following conversation with people. I've said, now listen, I don't want you to read anything about history. There's a lot of stuff in the world going on, a lot of issues where you have to know a lot about things. History of this, history of that. But I want you just to look up in the sky now, and you see what appears to be a high altitude plane, jet, obviously a jet, and what appears to be a string, a spray, a cloud, a mist, a contrail, people call it. We've seen those before, and they seem to hang around for a long time. And people say, oh, those are chemtrails. And other people will say, no, that's just water vapor. It's a differential of heat, the exhaust, the high altitude, the cold. Like when you walk outside and you see your breath as a mist, little fog. And I respond, Dane, I've been through this. This spreads out. The sky is hazy. It's gauzy. You can see this cross-hatched. This is not condensation. This is not water vapor. Water vapor, when you go outside, does not spread out. So the first question is, what is it that we are seeing? What is it? What are they spraying? Are they spraying? What the hell is it?
It's a particulate dispersion. It's not condensation, and that's why it remains in the air. And I would question your listeners or ask them to consider, on the coldest of days when their breath condenses, as you stated, would they walk a mile down the street and see a cloud hanging behind them? The answer is no, because that's not a particulate. So you need a particulate in order to get that sort of effect that you just described so accurately. And this is the express goal, Lionel, of solar radiation management. And if your listeners stick to the science terms, they'll find hard science: geoengineering, climate engineering, solar radiation management, stratospheric aerosol injection.
Wait a minute. Stop for a second. Yeah. This is the lawyer in me. We're talking to the jury now. I want you to explain this now. You say particulate. That means particles, things.
Correct.
One would be merely fog. That is just air of a different temperature hitting other air of another temperature. That's just fog, mist, condensation, whatever it is. Particulate means something that is added. Aluminum, barium, whatever. Particles, nanoparticles, whatever it is, but particles.
Correct.
What are they?
What we see, what we test for is what we see on the primary climate engineering patents: aluminum, barium, strontium, manganese, lead. We're finding all of these particles in very copious quantities descending down through our air column. In the case of California, where I live, and we did a lot of testing here, about 70 lab tests in Northern California alone, the amount of aluminum and barium, for example, coming through our air column is absolutely astoundingly high. We know it's not coming from China, as many people would like to assume, because we have CARB air studies measuring the particulates from China. That's the California Air Resources Board. So these particles match the patents, Lionel, and that's exactly what's coming down through the air column.
Now, we'll go through this. One interesting background story, Dane. You, the way you started, you did not go into this thing. You were the reluctant warrior. You did not find yourself, you didn't grow up saying, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to be a geoengineering crusader. I'm going to be the Joan of Arc of you found out inadvertently, very importantly, how did you back into this, and how did you discover that, hey, we're not getting enough sun? How did this happen originally?
You're correct. This is a battle I never wanted. I'm not a political activist of any kind. And I moved to the Pacific Northwest trying to find clean air. I grew up in the smoggy Southern California. I have a very large solar system. I live off grid completely. My home is on the cover of the world's largest renewable energy magazine. And when I began to lose very significant amounts of my solar power uptake, I mean 60, 70, 80% on some days from whatever these aircraft were leaving behind, clearly that was not condensation. I was astounded at the mountain of data on geoengineering, climate engineering, began to test my precipitation to see if the elements named in those patents were showing up in the precipitation, and they were. Continued to test. The amount of those elements continued to skyrocket, absolutely skyrocket. And after a year plus of diligent, solid, continuous investigation with the rest of my life on hold, I was faced with the fact that this was indeed going on above my head, and I simply couldn't look the other way.
No. So you went outside. You're off the grid. You have these solar radiation collection panels. You're not getting enough energy. You're saying, why is the sun, there's the sun, I see it, hasn't moved as far as I'm concerned. Why am I getting less sunlight, less radiation? What's happening? You can quantify it. You can see it. That's a great, if that's not a hello moment, that ding, 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 eureka. When did you realize that this was was happening because of this particulate matter, which was acting as a barrier between the sun? I'm being very basic here, between the sun and the earth, providing a particular barrier, thus minimizing solar rays. Is that how it works?
It is. These are light refracting particulates, and that's the express goal, again, to increase the albedo, the reflectivity of the planet in an attempt to slow down a runaway greenhouse effect. The climate engineers, unfortunately, have not considered the downstream effects of that, but their specific intent with solar radiation management, yes, is to block or deflect some of the sun's incoming thermal radiation. It has a huge negative effect on solar power uptake. In fact, Lionel, it affects sun, wind, and rain. So all three primary forms of renewable energy, and I have all three. I have wind turbines, hydropower, and solar, and geoengineering radically negatively affects all three.
And this is the irony, and this is what drives me crazy today, and admittedly it's not a very long ride. My friends who talk about climate change, I said, great. I said, if for no other reason, this is an expressed climate change function. It's there to systematically and drastically affect climate change. Does that not mean anything to you? Now, going back to what you said, when this particulate matter is dispersed, does it just fall to the ground? Does it stay there? Must it be renewed? If they stopped today and never sprayed again, would we get back to normal, or has the damage been done?
We're past the point of no return for many reasons. Many forms of anthropogenic activity have affected the biosphere and the energy balance of the planet. The intentional operations of interfering with those systems has caused much more damage still. The descent times of these particulates, the climate engineers that are trying to sell us climate engineering as a mitigation for the warming planet would have us believe that these particulates remain in the atmosphere for years. That's an absolute lie. I had extensive dialogue with a polymer chemist, and his estimates of descent times were as low as 12 to 24 hours. This material is raining down on us. We have the lab tests to prove it, and we're simply not being told the truth by academia, Lino.
So it has to be replenished constantly.
Constantly.
Okay.
Constantly.
Now, who are they? Who are these people doing this? And this, I would imagine, is all over the world, correct? Or is it just a U.S. thing?
All over the world. We have Senate documents, some almost 800 pages, historical documents stating that global governments would collude and cooperate on this issue in spite of otherwise adversarial relationships. So governments all over the globe are at this. As far as who are they? Ultimately, those roads lead back to those who print the money, the central bankers who control militaries, who control countries. So that's where those roads lead.
They would say to you, listen, Wigington, don't you understand? We're trying to do something good here. For the first time, we're not trying to kill people. We're trying to, whether it's right or wrong, but it's a noble effort to limit the greenhouse effect. Maybe it's wrong, but could it not be argued that for the first time ever, asset stripping globalist deep state, bankster types are doing something that, at least in spirit, is beneficial? Or is there a real reason behind this, something even more nefarious?
The activities going on in our skies have many, many agendas, including over-the-horizon radar, different forms of communication, DARPA weapons. But let's look at weather warfare, of which there is a long historical verification of. So let's look at all the Middle Eastern countries that were destabilized and toppled, as we were told they would be by General Wesley Clark right after 9/11. And every single one of those countries, every single one, underwent a 1 in 1,000 year drought to destabilize them before that happened. And we have the leaders of some of those countries, in the case of Iran, on the floor of the UN, stating publicly, emphatically, that their country's rain was being cut off by NATO weather modification programs. So we have the weather warfare aspect. Two, any notion that this is benevolent needs to be thrown out the window. Let's compare this to the pharmaceutical approach for the human body. And how many commercials, Lionel, do we see with the brand new pharmaceutical with a list of consequences that's exponentially longer than what it claims to mitigate? And then the next commercial after that will be an attorney telling you what you can do if you took last week's pharmaceutical.
Right.
So let's compare it to that.
Well, we kind of plead guilty to that one. My favorite is when you wait for one of my favorite inadvertent, a couple of them, remember Olestra years ago? This was the artificial fat. And one of the side effects was loose, greasy stools. This was an actual one. It's like, you know what? Forget that. I'll take the potato chips. What's a loose, greasy stool? They actually said that. There are medications that are being used to help senescence and senectitude in people who have Alzheimer's, who the side effects are, and I just find this funny, nymphomania, compulsive gambling, and we have been so conditioned and habituated. We say, well, that's what happens when you... Now, when I bring this up, and I've asked, and I have been on, and I cannot tell you how many times, and people hate me for this. But when I was doing a talk radio, big terrestrial talk radio, WABC, I was there in the afternoon. I said, why won't any of these news people or weather people ever say, hey, we got a question from you? Because, they're basically trying to pad and stretch. Oh, look, here's somebody's driveway covered in snow. Oh, here's, there's the proverbial ruler in a berm of snow. Here's one. What are they spraying? What is that? How is it that something that is so obvious, so that in a world, and I'm not going to argue global warming or climate change, I'm not going to do that, but in a country that, and society with the left and the right fighting over this, why hasn't somebody said, wait a minute, what's that? How do you explain that? And if I bring it up, I'm a conspiracy theorist. They're actually saying that I'm activating and repeating some crazy cockeyed idea about something that I can see right there. I just asked you 12 questions.
There's three important ones if I could answer. First, let's start with your final question. The reason we don't hear anything from the National Weather Service and NOAA and other government scientists, because there's an illegal federal gag order on the weathermen in the United States. Not only do they have no First Amendment protection to begin with, now there's an illegal federal gag order. People can look that up and see the actual gag order at geoengineeringwatch.org. Now, if we look at the consequences, I want to name some of those consequences so people understand how severe this is. Destroying the ozone layer, completely disrupting the hydrological cycle, disrupting the jet stream, contaminating virtually the entire surface of the planet with bioavailable toxic heavy metals. It's not only that we're inhaling those metals, but every life form is exposed to bioavailable and bioaccumulative metals. This is the single greatest assault on the web of life that the human race has ever launched, the greatest threat we face short of nuclear cataclysm. And for those in the global warming community, Lionel, I would say this: you can't have a legitimate discussion about the climate without first and foremost including climate engineering. And the reason so many of the environmental organizations and our attorneys, we have attorneys in the U.S. and Canada, and they have communicated with many of the large environmental groups, Greenpeace, Sierra Club, WWF, and the rest. They will not address this issue because their 501c3 nonprofits depend on them not addressing this issue. So that's why we don't hear anything from these groups. They're protecting their 501 nonprofits. Cowardly.
If we were to meet and go to geoengineering, and that, as you say, is really the correct term for this. Dan, if we were to go and meet with these people, where are they? Is it a UN convocation? Is it in the United States? Is it in the Senate, the House? Is there a science? Where are these people? And where would we go to meet? Let's say you and I, through some crazy moment, decide we're going to join them. Where do we go? Where are these people? I want to meet them. I want to thank them. Who are they? Where are they? Who are the ones? Somebody's paying for this. Somebody's paying for the plane. Somebody is working on the schedules. Somebody is monitoring this. This is a lot. This is a billion dollar plus. This is a 24/7 worldwide organization. It has to have a superstructure and a hierarchy and an administration. Where are they located?
This is certainly a climate engineering Manhattan project that dwarfs the original Manhattan project. We would go straight to the climate conferences, Lionel, Copenhagen, Cancun, Paris. And what has happened after, in the case of Copenhagen and Cancun, both climate conferences, is it just a coincidence that at both of those conferences, at the time of the conference, there were record cold temperatures outside in spite of warmer than average temperatures surrounding the entire region? Is that an accident? No, it was a demonstration of climate engineering with chemical ice nucleation for weather modification processes. And at those conferences, is it a coincidence that immediately that geoengineering was certainly the behind closed doors subject of discussion there, and those are the leaders you're talking about. And after Copenhagen and Cancun, for example, the aluminum futures escalated 25 to 30%. Why? Because aluminum is a primary element used in climate engineering by the tens of millions of tons, stated on the record by the world's most recognized geoengineers. Your listeners can see that on film and on the record. In fact, if they search my name, Dane Wigington, and David Keith, the world's most recognized geoengineer, they can see Dr. Keith from Harvard stating on the record his goal of dumping 20 million tons of aluminum into the atmosphere annually for all of us to breathe.
If we were, when we see one of these planes, what is this? Is this a commercial plane? Can we find them? When they land, can we say, let me see those nozzles? Because you have pictures, and that's another thing too. Please forgive my excited state, but you have no idea how I've been going crazy over this. You've got picture upon picture, nozzles inside. Some people say, oh, that's photoshopped. But who are these planes? They take off from where? And are the transponders on? Can we find them? Where do they land? Who are they?
Those are all exceptional and important questions. We have commercial and military aircraft involved. We have no data to indicate commercial aircraft personnel are involved, but their aircraft are absolutely being used. We not only have photographs of the nozzles mounted on the pylons aimed directly into the exhaust jet stream to make this look like, quote, condensation. We have film footage that conclusively shows these particulate dispersions being turned on and off. In regard to tracking the aircraft, though we can track the commercial aircraft that are part of the spray dispersions, the military aircraft, the tankers have their transponders turned off so that we cannot track them back to their location. But we have observers on the ground that have noted massive fleets of tankers leaving major Air Force bases, Hill Air Force Base, March Air Force Base, Beale Air Force Base. The list goes on and on. Again, the scope and scale of this program is immense. And you have to look at it through the lens of the government. Why would we believe that they would ask our permission to engage in climate engineering when we have military documents like owning the weather? Your listeners can look that up. The military stating its express goal to, quote, own the weather. We would be very naive to think they would ask our permission to do this.
Now, you say commercial. Could we be on a commercial plane jetting off to see grandma that's actually being used to disperse? Is that what you mean by commercial? Do they fit innocent civilian commercial planes with this? Could I actually be aboard a geoengineering particulate spraying flight?
You could. We see both scenarios. We see commercial passenger carrying aircraft leaving a particulate dispersion behind them. So there's no question we know they're spraying, and we have film footage again of that being turned on and off. You can't turn a condensation trail on and off. So there's no question passenger carrying aircraft are dispersing. And also in some of those aircraft, we believe fuel additives are being used to increase the quote pollution, the particulate dispersion. So that's another aspect of climate engineering that would be more conducive with passenger aircraft. We also see, Lionel, passenger aircraft. Your listeners can look at photographs we have of the interiors of passenger aircraft that are filled with tanks, not passengers. So we have multiple scenarios going on here, and we think we know now where at least one of the retrofit facilities is. We're still looking into that data that we have and the photographs we have, but they're being retrofitted at an astounding rate, and the air industry, the commercial air carrier industry, appears to be being subsidized in many ways by governments to keep these programs, to keep their aircraft in the air and keep these programs going.
Now, let me go back. This is what I want people to understand. This is very critical. You have seen, and anybody, and thank God for YouTube, and thank God for you, and I mean that. There are films, videos of, you see this streak, vapor, not vapor, this trail, whatever it is, it turns off, and then comes back on again, and off, almost like they're sending Morse code or something through this. Condensation cannot do that. You cannot all of a sudden raise the temperature, lower the temperature. And by the by, did I not read correctly, Dane Wigington, from something that you had written, that today's jet engines do not, by virtue of the fan configuration or by virtue of the mechanics, condensation, you don't see that today anyway. You don't see like the B-52s, flying over to drop bombs where you see all those thick clouds. Isn't pretty much that a thing of the past, unless it is particulate spraying?
It's an extremely important question, and one that your listeners need to understand. All military tankers and all commercial aircraft are fitted with a high bypass turbofan jet engine. It's a jet-powered fan. 85% of the air that passes through that engine, because it's designed for fuel efficiency and economy, 85% of the air that passes through it is non-combusted. So by design, that engine is nearly incapable of producing any condensation trail except under the rarest and most extreme circumstances. So that the contrail lie is perhaps the largest lie perpetrated on populations around the globe, Lionel. So you're exactly right, and thank you for bringing up that point.
Now, since the beginning of time, since man first traversed this planet, from shamans and rain dances and holy men, and we even had in the Catholic Church, St. Barbara was a patron saint of weather. We have been trying to figure out weather control. It's who we are. You control weather, you control everything. Think about this. D-Day, they had no ability to tell weather, not like we do now. So anybody who suggests that, where do you get off with this idea that we want to control weather? It's who we are. It's in our genes. I think it was William Cohen. Remember his famous off the cuff when he was Secretary of Defense? He said that right now, he made some reference, which people have quoted, about how the military are trying their best to weaponize weather. We know about HARP. We know about, and that's also been dismissed as some kind of crazy conspiracy lunatic, because as you know, we've weaponized the term conspiracy theory as well. So we have been trying to control and weaponize and change weather since it was probably the second or third thing we ever wanted to do. And we have been praying for this. And we have been, so the idea that somehow this would be so far-fetched, that of the idea of weaponizing weather and perhaps creating a dome or something which would, and explain this, which would make transmissibility of certain signals or whatever, you can create almost like a dome around this ionosphere. I don't know what I'm talking about, obviously. I mean, I just mentioned 3 or 4 subjects, but if you can understand what I just said, you're a better man than I, sir.
You're correct. You're exactly correct. This is one of the other agendas I mentioned. When you ionize the atmosphere, you make it more electrically conductive. It's more conducive to all forms of communication that travel through the atmosphere. So in the case of how long we've had this technology, some of the documents I mentioned that are on geoengineeringwatch.org, presidential documents, Senate documents, outline clearly these programs have been going on since immediately after World War II. We have publications like Popular Science in the 50s stating clearly we had this technology then. So for people in academia right now that are as I said, betraying the human race and the entire web of life by towing the official narrative that this is not going on or we don't have the technology. That's a blatant, glaring lie. And your listeners can look at, for example, articles in Popular Science published at geoengineeringwatch.org. You just have to search geoengineeringwatch.org Popular Science or geoengineeringwatch.org Collier's magazine, for example, from the 50s. We have original copies at geoengineeringwatch.org. And they can read the articles with themselves, stating clearly we had the technology then. We had the technology immediately after World War II. And it appears that we were using aircraft during World War II for the early beta testing of these programs. We just published archival footage we found from B-17s, which, as you might remember, many people excuse that away as being proof that this is just condensation. We have film footage of some of the B-17s now shutting their trail off mid-air as if it was cut with a knife, which means that also clearly was not condensation. B-17s had water vapor injections on the engine, so it's either that or it's early forms of weather modification, but it is not condensation. So this rabbit hole goes very deep. And one thing I would like to remember for those who deny this, again, using the science terms, this is an important point. I just want to make sure we don't miss it. We have those in academia that are trying to cover the tracks of the climate engineers exclusively using the chemtrails term, for which there is no scientific basis. And they did a survey, Carnegie Science did a survey using the chemtrails term and asked 450 scientists if they believe chemtrails were going on. Only 14% responded, 77 scientists, one of which said he didn't know, the other 76 said chemtrails weren't real. Geoengineeringwatch.org's attorneys did a survey of 1,500 climate scientists. We published a full list, which included the 77 that said chemtrails weren't real, and none of those 1,500, none, was willing to deny that climate engineering or geoengineering or solar radiation management wasn't already going on. None were willing to deny it. So if you use the science terms, they don't dodge this issue so easily. So that's where semantics are important. So again, consider that. Not one of 1,500 climate scientists, the full list is public at geoengineeringwatch.org, publicized, none were willing to deny this issue on the record. None.
And we don't want to be anti-Semitic, as they say. Well, look at Bill look at Bill Clinton, who said, "Is," and I, being a lawyer, I understand words are precise. It's like a client of mine one time asked me, he says, "Is this illegal?" I said, "No, but it's unlawful." And he goes, "Oh, that's good." I said, "No, not really." Now let's go back to what we said.
Yes.
We've always had cloud seeding, Operation Popeye during Vietnam. It's been around forever. Now, without divulging anything, have you, or do you know of, or do you suspect that there are agents, pilots, those who have had a change of heart, a conscience moment where they said, "I've got to reveal this," or "Listen, Dane, here's some pictures. You've got to get to the bottom. This is what's going on." Why is this still the best kept secret in town? I don't understand this. We're talking more about Oprah Winfrey today than something with, look, I don't know about you, but who doesn't have Alzheimer's today? Everybody's parent that I know. And there's this incredible increase of Alzheimer's because of we're living longer, but also they have said conclusively that it's because of aluminum in the environment. So going back to my first question, because I've been asking about 5 questions within one, compound as they may be, are there whistleblowers? Are there people who've come forward? Are there groups who say we can't be a part of this anymore?
The closest we have come to that in regard to someone who is actually involved with the program, in this case, the maintenance of the aircraft, of Air Force personnel who was communicated with through another Air Force personnel member, and then who in turn communicated with us. And this person would only nod his head to answer questions. But the bottom line is he signed a confidentiality agreement that contained provisions for lethal enforcement. You talk, you die. So we would not expect to have anybody openly lining up to speak out on this issue. In 2015, we lost 3 climate scientists, very prominent climate scientists that were the type to speak out on this issue. They died very anomalous deaths, and the world's most recognized Arctic scientist, Peter Wedham, stated on the record he thought they were taken out. He recanted 2 weeks later after I believe he was warned. Let's look at aircraft. These aircraft, we have some documentation to indicate that these aircraft are safeguarded with provisions to take them out if any pilot decides to defect and land that aircraft somewhere where the equipment could be examined. We've had a few aircraft just mysteriously fly off and go off the radar and disappear in recent years, haven't we, Lionel? So we can't prove that, but certainly we know that there is ample safeguarding by the government to make sure that people involved with these programs know the consequences if they attempt to reveal anything with these issues.
One of the things which I always try to anticipate what folks are thinking, and usually that coincides with what I'm thinking. And it's very difficult, Dane, for people to understand that whether you like Trump or not, or Obama, whoever it is, that the president does not control the world, that in retrospect, there are top secret clearances far above anything the president has. There are groups of people who represent jurisdictions that have nothing to do with us, because we in this, this American exceptionalism, we think we are in charge of everything. You can't have a worldwide spraying program and the president has no say? Yes, you can have that. That's the thing that's hard for people to understand. The fact that we have, I guess as being a president, he sits down one day and somebody says, listen, if you even think about doing anything about geoengineering or chemtrails or whatever you want to call it, forget it. That's already been done. That's not our bailiwick. Worry about taxes or something else. That's what's difficult for people to understand. That this is part of this, hate to say it, the New World Order, this unipolar world, this sense of this jurisdiction that controls things extra-governmentally, supra-governmental, above and beyond the jurisdiction of this country or anything, almost on their own, unfettered, unregulated, unedited, uncontrolled. I mean, I'm convinced people don't like to even think about that, or what I'm saying, because they have to admit we don't have control. They have to admit that there's this other world, this kind of evil substructure that's doing things that nobody from Putin on down, that nobody can control. Does that sound relatively rational to you?
It does. And let's first consider that in the case of the Trump administration and the administrations before them, there is every indication that all of them supported climate engineering, including the Trump administration, whose appointees openly supported climate engineering on the record. We covered that at geoengineeringwatch.org. But to back up what you just stated, even if Trump or anyone before him really tried to draw a line in the sand with these programs, how long would they be alive? How long did Kennedy last when he drew a line in the sand against the same sort of groups you just mentioned? He didn't last very long, did he? So in the case of Trump, we know that he knows because there was a meeting held at a retired U.S. Air Force Major General's home, whom I know, who introduced and passed on to Trump's top campaign people and Carson's top campaign people all the geoengineeringwatch.org data in January of 2016. So we know they know. But for all the reasons you just mentioned, certainly nothing is going to be done about these programs. They're being ramped up as the military-industrial complex wants to ramp them up. And in this regard, it's important to understand all the order followers all down the line. Lionel, did the pilots in Vietnam who were spraying their own comrades on the ground with Agent Orange, were they told that that would harm those comrades? Of course not. They were told it was fine. What about the
It's a great example, yes.
And the soldiers that were told to put on a set of goggles and go watch that nuclear bomb go off in our own homeland here? And now we have studies to say that the nuclear detonations in our own country killed at least 400,000 U.S. citizens. They don't care about the consequences. There's no question about that. And on the order followers, I know USDA soil scientists, USDA scientists, Forest Service scientists, Fish and Game scientists, and I've been in the field doing testing with these academicians who absolutely know this is going on, but they're not about to jeopardize their paycheck and pension. They want to stay in their bubble and pretend it'll all magically go away. And we need to break that mentality, the order follower mentality, because the ship is going down by the day. There's no question about that.
We have been doing, and as you know, Dane, since the Milgram experiment, since the Stanford prison experiment, one of the things which is so interesting is when you look at Nazi guards and people who, anybody, just not Nazi Germany, but people around the world who have exacted horrible things against people. Listen, we have people that we laud and herald who drop bombs and incinerated from Tokyo to Nagasaki, and they somehow, and I'm not going to argue that or relitigate that one, but somehow in their own mind, they thought, I'm either following orders or there's a better reason for that. What about you personally? You're like the soul. You are the most eloquent, and I'm not merely blowing smoke or geoengineering chemtrail vapors at you. But you are the most eloquent, the most learned, the most determined. Have you suffered? Has anybody come to you and said, listen, Wigington, enough. What does it cost? Go away. You're a nice man. You've got a family. Don't you want to go after something else? Don't you think better? I mean, I don't know about you, but I would, if I was somebody, whoever, Soros, always the evil genius, whoever it is, it's always Soros. Give Wigington a pile of cash, let him go away, or tell him to just kind of cool it, or talk to him. Certainly somebody must have approached you at some point.
First, if I had one wish, it would be to live on a thriving planet, and I would live in a teepee and eat acorns if I could have that wish. So no amount of money would make any difference to me. I left Bechtel Power, where I made a lot of money at a very young age because of what I saw in that company. I did not want to become like those who had obviously changed into something very different from working for a company like that. So the only thing I've had happen on the way home from a large presentation about 10 o'clock at night, I got a phone call from a federal EPA employee that wanted to know why I was still beating this drum. And I made it clear to him that I would continue to beat this drum unless or until I took my last breath or these programs ended. So that's the only type of obviously being monitored scenario that I've ever had happen. I've had nothing like that happen since. And I fully believe that we have many allies behind the curtain, growing numbers of allies who want these programs exposed, who want them halted. And the two Air Force Major Generals that I'm communicating directly with, both retired, and I communicated one of those to you who had the Trump people in his house, but both of them confirm that we have a growing number of allies behind the curtain helping as much as they can to bring these issues to light and to a halt before there's nothing left of our biosphere to salvage. I'm communicating right now with a former Senate Armed Services Committee member as well. And these people have to stand up together. If they don't stand up together, they will certainly be cut down. And we're trying to provide them all the data they need. I'm shipping materials out. So I think we're growing allies behind the curtain, Lionel. That's where we need them most.
Let's do a little thought experiment, because it's so funny. I have a relative I'm not going to mention him too much, but I turned him into a lunatic. Well, he was halfway there, to be honest, but one day we walked out, I said, look at those things. What do you think they are? And I mean, within, I don't know, hours, I thought he was going to run into the street, and the thing that amazed him, he says, how could I have not noticed this before? And I said, don't feel bad. It's like UFOs. I don't want to get into that. But the best place to hide is in the sky. There's an old man I knew of. Seriously, he had money, and he didn't believe in banks. And he told me, he says, you know where I had my money? In a bag, waterproof, in a tree. I said, why? He says, nobody looks up in the tree. They always look down. They always think you bury stuff. Nobody looks up. People never look and marvel at stuff. They're just too busy. They look down. Now that may be, I'm not trying to extrapolate that too much, but there's something to be said. It's hiding in plain sight. No one looks up. We're too busy. We're looking down. We're focused on our speedometer, on our children, on TV, on this, on that. We don't look up. Figuratively, literally. Now, here's a thought experiment. Let's say somebody's watching right now and they're in a bar, they're talking to a friend, and somehow they could have you in the next room talk to them in an earpiece. And can you give us like 4 or 5 of those killer questions where you could say, ask somebody this. If you knew what Dane Wigington knew, what would you say? So if we run across somebody who says, come on, if this was obvious, they would have already reported it, or it's contrails, or whatever it is. But just give us like maybe 4 or 5. The real inside baseball questions that even people like you know that would really make people think, holy wow. For example.
First and foremost, you can't turn a condensation trail on and off. Again, when people can look up in the sky, and see that type of activity being turned on and off, that's one example. When they see one aircraft leaving a trail from horizon to horizon next to an aircraft leaving nothing, and if someone's observant and they did look up, that's exactly what they would see. That absolutely can't be explained any other way than one of those aircraft leaving a particular dispersion. You can't have a grid pattern one day and nothing the next, unless there's programs of atmospheric dispersion going on. We see in many locations, this is not a constant because there's some reasons they spray at night as well, but in many locations we'll see heavy aerosol operations during the daytime, and we'll see aircraft leaving nothing at night. If you go outside, you can see their strobe lights are leaving nothing. Why? Because they're attempting to let some of the radiant heat escape back out into the atmosphere, in spite of the fact that the climate engineering operations overall, again, doing all the damage I stated earlier, shutting the ozone layer, disrupting the hydrological cycle, trapping more heat than they deflect, doing immense damage. But we see that type of activity. Why would we have 160 patents for these programs? Why would we have the government, or why would we expect the government to ask our permission? Lionel, did they ask our permission to detonate 2,000 plus nuclear bombs? They didn't. So when we're descending into now what would be most correctly scientifically categorized as an abrupt climate shift, this is not global warming. We would be lucky if it was just global warming. And this is not about Al Gore or the IPCC, the largest scientific panel ever created in human history on the climate. On any subject, IPCC is the largest. All of them, all of their worst case scenarios being reported are far short of how severe and immediate our situation is. So the bottom line is, why would anybody rationally expect the government or governments around the globe to ask our permission? And when we see what's happening in our skies, as you correctly stated, we have global dimming, Lionel. I'm not sure if you've heard that term. Global dimming right now is 25 to 30%. 25 to 30% of the sun's direct rays that didn't reach the planet 50 years ago, or that did reach the planet 50 years ago, now no longer do. So we have virtually mountains of data, but it comes down to what people can see with their own eyes. If they looked up from one day to the next, you cannot explain the on again, off again swaying programs. You can't.
Let's focus on that one again. And you know, when somebody sees in the old days, and we've seen it, skywriting. You got this plane, yes, and it does this. It says S, and it turns it off. So you see smoke, and that's just smoke. That's not particulate.
Well, smoke is a particulate.
Okay. Well,
it is a particulate.
Okay, very good. Okay, fine. When we think of particulates, I'm thinking of little grains, little nano beads of something. Okay, fine. But you see the S, he has to be able to turn it on and off, or else it would be just cursive.
Correct.
And of course, the G forces that this poor guy would have to pull would be problematic. So that's what it is. You see it on and off.
Correct.
The thing you just said, because there's that aha moment, because what we're doing is, imagine the jury's going to go back into that room and they're going to be talking and they're going to each say something that you said that really got their attention. How can you have 160 patents for something that doesn't exist? How can you have an industry, a scientific, concentrated focus on a procedure, on an application that doesn't exist? All of these patents to basically control weather through dispersal or whatever it is. 160. What's the earliest? What's the latest? Roughly. Give us a time span.
That was going back to the 1920s. This has obviously been on their mind forever. And your listeners can look this up. The U.S. military top brass has stated on the record repeatedly, the greatest U.S. national security threat of all is the disintegrating climate. Why would we think that they are not going to engage in programs that they feel will keep business as usual for them and allow them to engage in these sort of operations overseas to topple nations at the same time? Why would we think that they wouldn't do that? Or why would we think they would ask our permission? So again, U.S. military has stated on the record repeatedly, greatest U.S. national security threat of all, disintegrating climate.
If I was going to sit back and when one of the things that's been missed is that oftentimes, Dane, as you know, science fiction is really science fact, but in advance or on the drawing board, because if man can think of it, he'll do it.
Yes.
And when somebody, for example, I always thought, if I could somehow take, and I'm just going to use phrases I know nothing about, but in my crude sense of physics, a Tesla wave. If I could go to some part of the world where tectonics are precarious and I were to direct something up and create something, an earthquake causing a tsunami, I can wipe something out, not send one military plane. I could sit back, plausible deniability. Oh, Lordy. Then, of course, I can say, hey, Haiti, like certain foundations, do you need $10 billion? Yeah, we'll raise it or whatever. Think what I could do to my enemy. I don't have to fire a shot. And not only can I just destroy them, I can rebuild it. That's where I make my money. So the idea of being able to control weather, natural disasters, create them and sit back and say, how about that? It is not science fiction. It is nothing to do with... There was a recent one, you're in the particular area. I found it fascinating, and others as well, that when the Northern California fires, which, by the way, we kind of talk about, and then talk about turning off and on, we don't talk about them anymore. Now there's mudslides. But people were suggesting the possibility of direct, and I'm not saying this is true, direct energy weapons. People were seeing blue lights and lasers, and because of our phones, and interestingly enough, people were saying, look at this particular, the fire went all around this factory, but the trees, this one particular house was burned, just basically disintegrated, but the surrounding trees, okay, I'm not going to get sci-fi on people, but people out there are very smart, and people who are watching this right now know what the government can do, know what governments and the sick mind of man can do. And we also have the attention span of a gnat. And that's your biggest problem, because people, remember, they care. We were talking about the Northern California fires. We don't even talk about it anymore. We're talking about Oprah Winfrey. We're talking about the Golden Globes. We're good for, or maybe a book by Michael Wolff. We're good for 5 days tops, and then this ADD kicks in, and we're off to the races to something else. This has got to be focused. I don't understand. It's all around us. And also, I would venture to say that people around the rest of the world, in other countries, Europe and elsewhere, have a far greater attention span because they've seen maybe, we're lucky in this country. We've never really been attacked. We're kind of naive. When you're in Europe and you can say, I remember, just around the corner, World War II and that sort of thing. I know I'm rambling incoherently, but it goes to show you about our own specific American naivete where we don't want to think ill. We don't want to think bad. We just move on. Now, we've had enough of this, Dane. Thank you very much. And let's move on and let's talk about whatever. Does that make any sense?
Well, first, in regard to historical fact, let's look at what we know our government's done to us. Wall Street Journal published in 1977 that as of that point in time, there were 239 biological tests carried out on U.S. populations by the U.S. military as of 1977. How much worse is that now? They routinely test on us. They test on their own soldiers. They don't care about the U.S. population. And the population should consider that not only are they an increasing, not only are they expendable, I should say, to the power structure, they're an increasing liability. And the population needs to understand that. In the case of California, the ridiculously resilient ridge of high pressure, which has been named by the meteorologists, that is an ionosphere heater-induced dome of high pressure. There's absolutely no question about this. And if your listeners want to see shots from NASA satellite images that will shock them, that will leave them with no question whatsoever that climate engineering is real, square clouds, 90-degree angles in low-pressure systems, this is from radio frequency transmissions, and they can look at the NASA satellite images at geoengineeringwatch.org, and they will have no question that this is real, and it is unquestionably climate engineering. So in the case of the fires, what we can say conclusively is the template was set for that to happen by climate engineering and by being able to heat the ionosphere with ionosphere heaters like HAARP. This is one of about 80 facilities around the globe. They can create different pressure gradients, which means they can create the kind of wind that happened during those fires. So regardless of what the ignition source of the fires were, we know that climate engineering absolutely played a role not only in cutting off the precipitation, and many people don't know this, Lionel, in spite of the rain California got last year, the fuel moisture levels, the moisture in the foliage at the time the fires occurred was at all-time record lows. Why? Because we had the longest, hottest summer on record in parts of California, and these particles are desiccant particles. They absorb and accrete all available atmospheric moisture, so it literally siphons the moisture out of the foliage. So we can say conclusively, and we've covered this at geoengineeringwatch.org, the climate engineering operations absolutely set the template for that firestorm catastrophe, regardless of what the ignition sources were. And let's look at the rain we just got yesterday in California. And what we normally get over California now is completely unorganized systems of drifting, aerosolized murk that a few drops fall out here and there in a very scattered, unorganized fashion. But what we saw yesterday, interestingly enough, was precipitation hotspots, which were predicted before it happened, directly over the fire zones. Now, how did the meteorologists know? How did they know that was going to happen? Or how did they know days in advance that we're going to have a mostly sunny day, and that's their term, when there's not a natural cloud in the sky? How do they know that? Because they're reading scripts. Who gives them those scripts? Raytheon, defense contractor Raytheon, that is a primary geoengineering contractor, does all the weather modeling for the National Weather Service and NOAA. So we have the Foxes literally running the henhouse, passing down the scripted, scheduled weather to everybody down the line, and all of the script readers simply read their script. And that's what we have. So the assault on California is real and ongoing. There's no question about that. And when you're ready, one subject I would like to hit.
Please.
Chemical ice nucleation for weather modification. They are engineering winter storms with patented chemical ice nucleating elements. What's that mean? It means they can chemically convert what should have been precipitation into frozen precipitation. And we have, in the case of the Chinese military doing this, we have Fox News, Time Magazine, and Popular Science all covering this. Your listeners can look this up if they search Chinese scientists create artificial snowstorms. So for all those that are shivering in the east with the last bout of cool down that was strategically timed for the end of 2017 and the beginning of 2018 so that they could say this is the coldest start to the year ever in certain locations, it's a psychological operation at that point. With chemical ice nucleation, they create a cold, dense layer on the ground, which lowers the mercury, makes all the headlines they want, convinces people there's nothing wrong with the climate, or at least confuses them and divides them on the subject. And thus, we'll have a weather whiplash scenario after that. When these operations pass over this particular, whatever particular engineered event, we have an immediate rebound of temperatures back to far above normal. That's going to happen again in the U.S. this week. Weather whiplash. So the engineered cool downs are exactly that, with chemical ice nucleating elements. The listeners can look at the patents, they can look at the processes, they can look at lab tests of these elements, all at geoengineeringwatch.org. So there's nothing natural in our weather now. Nothing.
Wow.
Sorry for that diatribe, but this is very, very
diatribe. No. And listen, don't let me ask you something. There's something you know this. You're the expert. I mean, tell me if anything you want to know, because I want to also know what is it that, other than the obvious, what keeps you up at night? And if I could sit there and say, okay, listen, Wigington, I've got you. You're in front of the president of the Congress, the Senate, whatever it is. You get to ask him one question, just one. What would it be? What that one thing that they will turn around and say, I don't know what, he's got us on this. What would you ask? Or two or three, to be fair. But what is it that you want to ask of the government or Trump or whoever? Because he might see this.
Do they want to avoid near-term planetary omnicide? And that's exactly where we're headed at light speed. We're losing 200 to 300 species of plant, animal, and insect to extinction every single day. And I'm not negating the countless forms of human activity, anthropogenic activity, that have decimated the planet. But the single greatest assault on the web of life is absolutely mathematically climate engineering. If we continue on the current trajectory, we're heading toward what's known as Venus syndrome, because we're destroying Earth's natural atmospheric protection. And now let's take Fukushima. Now we know Fukushima could be an extinction event by itself. So now we've destroyed much of Earth's natural atmospheric protection. Now if we have a CME, a coronal mass ejection, solar flare, a Carrington-type event, now we're going to have Fukushima times 100 or 200, because that's going to shut down grids around the globe. We're going to have nuclear meltdowns everywhere. Game over. Collapsing ozone layer. The current data that we have at geoengineeringwatch.org, and one of the experts that's working with us, indicates that at the current rate of ozone destruction, most of it related directly to climate engineering, not that there's not other causes, but climate engineering, primary cause, gives us about 8 to 10 years till total ozone layer collapse. Game over. Again, bottom line is, for that question, how long do they want to survive on this planet? If we continue climate engineering, I would argue mathematically we have no chance.
Now, I want to mention something. Immediately, you're scaring the hell out of people, and that's good. And people are going to want to dismiss you because if they dismiss you, then they don't have to worry about what you're saying and they can go on with the rest of their day. Now, and I know there are a lot of people out there who have a big hard time with climate change, global warming. I don't have a problem so much with the idea as I do, and we're talking about anthropogenic causation models and that sort of thing. I don't have a problem so much with the models of this as I do the people who all of a sudden are self-styled experts. So we end up sometimes arguing about that because we hate each other. And we'll say, you know what, I hate climate change. No, you hate that guy. It's like saying, I hate osmosis. It's like, no, not really. We're not saying this, lest anyone think, because I've got some very serious problems about what has been adduced or suggested, the averments made regarding climate change, but we're not talking that. We're not talking about a little polar bear because somebody wants to drive a Hummer. We're not talking about that, though that's not to be dismissed. This is different. I don't want anybody to just dismiss you and go, oh, God, another one of these Birkenstock, tree-hugging, freaky, left coast nut, No. We're talking about aerosolized dispersal of geoengineering and that sort of thing. There's another problem. And it's almost like the atmospheric quizzlings, if you will, the Al Rokers of the world, the Bill Nye the Science Guy, the Neil deGrasse Tyson, these gatekeepers, these people who say, hey, I like this. I'm Bill Nye. I'm a millionaire. I don't even know anything. I'm not going to let anything get in the way of that. I'm Al Roker. What do? I'm Al Roker. I'm Neil deGrasse Tyson. I'll say whatever you want. Do you have an opinion as to what kind of a disservice they've impacted on this world by virtue of their own nescience and their own skewed version of reality?
Yes, I have an opinion. And for all those people, the Al Rokers, deGrasse Tyson, Bill Nye, and all the major environmental groups which I touched on earlier, their betrayal of the human race and the web of life is absolutely unimaginable. It's criminal. I would argue it's absolutely criminal for them to pretend that climate engineering isn't happening because that protects their paycheck and their pension and their status is absolutely criminal. And they should be looked at for what they are, and they should be exposed for what they are. And that's what we do at geoengineeringwatch.org. We try to find those types of people, openly CC them credible data that they cannot refuse, just like the 1,500 climate scientists we surveyed. And we CC as many other people as we can so that they know that we know they know, if that makes sense. And when you send out a 60-day notice for pending lawsuit in the United States, and within 3 hours, I heard from Marcia McNutt, the head of the American Academy of Sciences, within 3 hours, and her initial attitude of being cavalier and denying the issue went away very quickly when she was accidentally CC'd by our attorneys that were responding to me about her message, and her attitude changed immediately. Why? Because she knew a team of attorneys saw her attitude of, again, cavalierly trying to deny this issue. Her attitude immediately changed. We did a full publication on that. These people simply have no courage. They have no sense of honor, no sense of morality, no sense of responsibility to the whole. And we need to expose them as accomplices in the climate engineering criminal cover-up. And that's exactly what they are. So again, you can't have a legitimate discussion about the climate unless you discuss climate engineering first and foremost. And that makes every major global warming advocacy group hypocritical at best, criminal at worst.
Touche. There was a time in this country where we look back right now and we say, can you believe, Dane, that there was a time in this country when doctors would actually suggest a particular brand of cigarette? Can you believe that the AMA and others were so bereft of, they knew and were shocked by that? It's almost criminal. We are bombarded by big agri, big pharma, big you name it, big tobacco, and we become habituated to it. And what I want people to understand is that when you have somebody, look, if you're Al Roker, and didn't he recently say something like, look at the beauty, new cloud formations, that they're not even cloud, these are they gave it a name. It's like naming deformed children, giving them like, oh, that's the club foot, No, you don't euphemize this. This is a pathology. By naming it, by giving it some cute little appellation, some weird kind of taxonomy, this is not cirrus cumulus nebulus. No, this is, explain that, Butte.
Well, first, let's go back to Al Roker, because I actually saw him on an episode with a photograph that a viewer sent in of a grid pattern sprayed sky. And Roker had the audacity to say, "Isn't Mother Nature incredible?" Now, at that point, he's literally a criminal accomplice in the climate engineering cover-up. And this is the sort of activity we have in academia right now. So beyond that point, the behavior of those that are naming clouds, as you said, to give them legitimacy. And that's what it is. That's the medical industry does the same thing. If you laugh in the wrong manner, they put an acronym on it and give it legitimacy, and now you need treatment. And they've done the same with the 18 or so clouds that have apparently never been seen before recent years, and they're a result of climate engineering. And they just simply give it a name that makes it official, and now everybody goes back to their iPhones and pretends it's not happening. But the bottom line, again, back to the immediacy of our situation, we are not just heading into the sixth great mass extinction on our planet. We are far, far into the curve. We've lost, I mentioned this species extinction rate a moment ago. We've lost 60% of Earth's wildlife populations in the last 40 years, and that rate is accelerating radically. In Northern California, we've lost 90% of aquatic and terrestrial insects, and that's as measured by a former Forest Service biologist, highly degreed biologist that I work directly with, and a fish and game biologist. We now have German scientists confirming our findings. They have found 80% of the insects have died there. If the insects can't make it, how long will we make it? Let's go back to the aluminum and the bees. I know people know the bees are dying. They're alarmed about that, correct? Mm-hmm. What people don't know, and what mainstream media is not telling them, is the bees are dying from aluminum. There are other factors as well, but the most significant factor is aluminum exposure. Your listeners can look this up because we have peer-reviewed study to prove it. Search bees, aluminum. So we have bees exhibiting symptoms of, guess what? Alzheimer's and dementia. Why? Because they're packed full of aluminum. Where did it come from? Climate engineering. And we knew this was the case because the bees were dying 1,000 miles into the wilderness, far away from farms, and back to the environmental groups who won't talk about this factor. They want to talk about glyphosate, and that's a problem. But there's a much bigger problem that nobody wants to talk about because it's not good to protect their 501 nonprofit. We need to deal with this elephant in the room, Lionel, or we're very soon going to have nothing to care about, and that's a mathematical fact.
And by the by, as far as from bees being, the canary in the coal mine, so to speak. I mean, I look at the area of California. I mean, just if you're into anything called growing.
Yes.
If you want walnuts, if you like your tomatoes, if you like this thing called pollination, they're not this cute little bumblebee. They're not. Look, you don't need me to explain that. Let me talk about you in conclusion. What is your organization? How can we help you? How do you do this? Look at it. You spent over an hour this morning, thank God, expressing How do you make a living? This your family. Doesn't your wife ever say, "Oh, Dane, for God's sakes, nobody wants to hear about you've said enough." Look, Dane, you've said enough. They can get your videos. They just come back home. Your kids don't even know you anymore. You're driving me crazy with this stuff. People are looking at you like, "Oh, there he is again, Mr. Chemtrail." How do you make your money? What can people do? How do we spread the word? And why do you do this? And how do you support yourself? And all of those questions.
First, before I was forced to face this battle, I was working in the forest, many times alone, other times with a crew, restoring habitat on my own resources and with some cost share programs from the government. I did 6 cost share programs using half my money, half theirs. They participate when you're willing to restore habitat and leave it as habitat. And I would have been quite content to do that and plant trees for the rest of my days, but I could no longer do that in good conscience, knowing what I knew was happening above my head. And I would have been happy again doing that to the end of my days. I was retired at the point in time I started this issue. I had a large SEP retirement account. I had real estate holdings, all of which have been liquidated to continue in this battle. And on the geoengineeringwatch.org website, we didn't even have a contributions button for 5 years after I ran that site, all on my own dime. So I've gone as far as I can. I've used my own resources. I sold off real estate holdings. to continue in this battle, but I won't need any of those assets where we're headed. And that's what people need to stand back and realize. Whatever they think they're storing up for a future that's not going to happen in the way they anticipated it, if we don't do our part for the greater good now, we have no future. It's that simple. So I've liquidated everything I have to continue forward in this battle. There are some now that help us with materials because we've sent out a million color glossy flyers, well over 10,000 DVDs. We were at about 50,000 color glossy booklets. You should have a package soon.
Yep.
I sent one off to you. So the bottom line is we're trying in every way we can to reach a critical mass of awareness, and nothing else matters but reaching that critical mass. And in doing so, because people ask, how do we stop this? And I would argue reaching a critical mass is the only way forward, so that every family of every military individual who is participating in these programs, their family members know what they're participating in and know that it's not okay. And we can stop these programs from the inside out if we reach a critical mass of awareness, break down the compartmentalization that the military engages in. You know that, Lionel.
Sure.
The left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing.
By design.
Exactly. And we have to break that wall down. We have to force the media, the absolutely criminal media that is avoiding this issue, does everything they can to marginalize it because that's what they're paid to do. So all I'm asking individuals to do, Geoengineering Watch is non-political. We don't advertise. We're simply trying to be a data repository and get the word out. Investigate what we're saying. Arm yourself with credible data, and you can do that for free from your own home. We provide links to downloadable, printable data. Anyone can print that themselves where they are. We simply want to arm them with the materials they need, or they can share those links, and from their own home computer, they can start spot fires of awareness everywhere and ask others to do the same. And if we can bring this issue to light, and the populations of the globe know they've been part of a grand and lethal experiment without their knowledge or their consent that literally has life on Earth in the balance, I would argue at that point we can expose and halt these programs, and that would be the greatest single leap we can take in the right direction. We still have immense challenges, immense problems to face, but that alone would make clear to the populations of the globe that they are absolutely expendable and more clearly a liability to their governments. We must expose this issue. It's the single greatest leap we could take in the right direction.
Final question. Do you have any debunkers or any kind of people who are disinformationalists who are dismissing what you're saying? Any enemies that you have? Anybody who's saying, oh, that Wigington, he's close, but no, he's got it all wrong. And anybody that we should be, put it this way, the version of Snopes. You know how these guys came up, all of a sudden, a guy and his wife and a cat, all of a sudden they're experts. But do you have disinformation trolls or bots or organizations out against you?
Legions of them. And here's what I would say to your listening audience. I have never, ever asked anyone to believe me, ever. What I've asked them to do is look at the data. This is not about me. It's about the issue. It's about our collective futures. It's about the fact that no one has the right to play God with the weather, to play God with Earth's life support systems. So if someone walks away from this because they choose not to believe me, they're simply in denial, because I've never asked anyone to believe me. But I ask them if they have any sense of responsibility to the whole, to their children, to their children's futures, to the future of the web of life. They have a responsibility to investigate this issue. It's not an option, it's an obligation for all of us.
Dane Wigington from geoengineeringwatch.org. I will put all of the links. Please, you have my email. We have talked. This is, I think, out of whatever I have done in 30 years of professional, whatever it is, opinionating, this is the most important interview, the important thing I've ever done, bar none. It is so cosmically obvious. This is a no-brainer. This is so fundamentally and just monumentally obvious. And how anybody can for a moment dismiss it or try to look the other way. And all I ask, and I believe you ask, is just be aware. That's all. Because if this, it's the ignorance, that darkness of ignorance and nescience and not being aware of it. That's the part. We're a country that all of a sudden can do a hashtag on our hands and it goes viral. It's forgotten, but it goes viral. We'll get into a fad all of a sudden. We'll plank. We'll, whatever. And we'll jump on it. And it will be, again, virality. If ever there was something that needed to go viral and beyond viral, if there is such a thing, it's this. Because it's a no-brainer. This is not about a tree hugger. This is not about those people. This is about somebody for whatever reason. And by the way, I will say in conclusion, don't worry about the motivation. Don't get hung up on why. Well, why would they want to spray? I don't know. Why did Ted Bundy want to do all that? I don't know. Why did they want to drop? I don't know. Motivation is interesting. That's not critical. What's critical is that everybody watching do something about this. And Dane Wigington, thank you. And I would say on behalf of a grateful, soon, planet, thank you for your work. And whatever I can do, please let me know, sir. It is that important. You are a saint, and I thank you, sir.
If I could make one final point.
Please.
That is this. No matter how much research I do, no matter how much data we post at geoengineeringwatch.org, without people like you, and if we had more like you with your influence, your status, if we had more people like you with the courage that you have shown, we would have already won this battle. So the gratitude is mine. Thank you for making your voice heard on this issue, more than I can say. Because when I started this mission, I only heard my own voice coming back at me. And now to know that people like you are lending your voice to this critical issue gives one hope.
Well, listen, thank you. Dane Wigington, geoengineeringwatch.org. We will talk again, my friend. Thank you so much. This is one of many, and for devoting an hour and 13 minutes of your life to this goes to show you your commitment, and I thank you, sir. We will talk again, sir. I salute you, and thank you, Dane.
Thank you.